Good afternoon, and thank you so much for tuning in to Our Voices blog live stream discussion this afternoon on negotiation. I'm Kate Blumenthal from Our Voices blog, a blog for women in STEM and academia, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by UC Davis Advanced Faculty Director, Dr. Linda Bassan. Now, before we get started, I want to mention that we do have a number of questions that were submitted by our community members online, and we'll also be monitoring all of our social media pages. So if any audience members have any questions, comments, feedback, or would just like to give us a little shout out and say hello, please feel free to do so on our Facebook page or on our Twitter account. The handle is ourvoices_blog. So Dr. Bassan, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm hoping that you might be able to kick off our conversation by telling us a little bit about yourself, why negotiation skills are so important to develop throughout your career, and different opportunities for negotiation within academia.
All right, thanks, Kate. So I started out as a biology major, was always attracted to STEM, and I never really saw myself going for a PhD or working at a university, but I had great mentors who pushed me along that path and who really helped me be the best me, by pointing out where my strengths were, because typically you cannot, let me pick up my seat. Okay, because typically if you're first generation going to college, you don't really have any of the support structure that you need to understand what you're really getting yourself into. So mentoring was always important. Having sponsors, which are mentors who will actually push others to see how great you are, is also important. But I also learned that negotiating is vital, but challenging, especially for women or underrepresented groups, because of the phenomenon of implicit bias, and that you're not seen as a person who should be negotiating hard. You're seen as a woman, you're a nurturer, you're the one that should be taking one for the team. So it's important to get over that mindset that I'm supposed to be the one that takes care of everybody else. So yes, I'll accept a lower salary or the worst office or whatever, because that's just the role that I play. So as a faculty member, I had numerous students, postdoctoral fellows, come to me when they were starting negotiation for jobs. So I have a lot of experience with what worked and what didn't, practical experience. And so we decided that it would be important to share some of these tips with a broader audience.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit, I guess, about salary. We had a lot of questions that came in online from our community about salary. So the first question that we had was, how do you negotiate it, and should it actually be listed in your cover letter when you're first applying for a position, or do you wait until you're made an offer?
Well, I think the first thing that you need to do is to know what your salary should be. So to learn, if you're moving to a new city, what are the rents, what are the costs, utilities, other costs that you might face. And you could easily do that by calling realtors and finding out, what salary would you need in order to live there at the same level or maybe slightly higher level than where your current position. I would not put a salary or a projected salary in a letter. You want them to be the first ones to make an offer so that you can react to it. Not put it in a letter, because what I find is that a lot of people, especially if they're newly graduating and it's your first position, will lowball their own worth. So you don't want to do that. You want to find out when you go to the institution or the organization, when you meet with the HR people, what's the salary range for the position that you're being considered for, and then go to the top of that salary range. I think that's a good thing to do, but you need to know a lot about the organization, its culture, and I wouldn't put anything up front in a letter. In the beginning, you want to sell yourself as the employee they're dying to get, and then you can say, okay, here's the price. But if you do it too soon, they might think you're inexperienced, or generally, wow, it's too low. Many people think they're asking for too much, but usually they're too low, so they're inexperienced, and their inexperience is showing.
So when do you know that, okay, I should stop pushing? If they come to you with an offer and you're like, nah, that's too lowball, you ask for something higher, and they still don't come back and meet you where you are, how much is too much to push on HR?
Well, I think that you have to be prepared in any negotiation to walk away. And so you have to know what the minimum you'll accept or take is. And you have to be strong and just say, sorry, that's too low. Thank you for your time. I enjoyed, the interview, and be prepared to leave. And if they come back higher, then, fine. But if they don't, you don't want to be in an organization that doesn't recognize your value. Again, if it is a reasoned salary, that is what is typical for that field, what is typical for that position, on the high end of what is typical for that position, but not something outrageous, like I want to be paid more than the CEO as a receptionist. People are going to say, yeah, well, when you come back down to earth, then
give us a call.
Because we'll probably reconsider your application.
So still talking about negotiation with salary. So if they come back and they're lower than what you ask for, but they maybe throw in some other types of benefits, would you still consider that a win? And if so, what type of benefits do you think kind of balance out a lower salary or would make it worthwhile?
Well, I think, again, it depends on the situation. But if they're going to say, we're paying you less salary, but you get full childcare. I mean, if you figure out the value of that, and if you have to pay for it yourself, then that's like a great, advantage. Or you have a phenomenal retirement system, that we put money into an education account for your children, or they get free tuition at the university. All of those things can be factored in as equivalent to salary, as money you would not have to pay. But one thing that many people will go for is if it is a corporation, and if it's a startup, they might not have a lot of cash on hand, but they can give you stock equity. And I know students from my generation who went into some of these corporations and made quite a bit of money off of the stock when the companies were finally sold. And quite a bit of money. So sometimes that, equity in the company can be equally important.
Oh, that's wonderful. I noticed that one of the first benefits that you had mentioned was potentially childcare. And we actually got a lot of questions from people asking about childcare and how to make sure that you can negotiate for flexibility or funding for childcare needs without making it seem like you're not committed. And do you have any advice for how to make sure that you're not experiencing bias when you make those asks?
I think one of the things you want to be careful about is to not appear that you're saying, I'd like to be paid for a full-time job, but I'm only going to work part-time. So know what time you're talking about and whether you can be flexible enough to get the work done that they're expecting. And I would say at the beginning, you just ask, for information, not you're saying this is I'm negotiating for this at this point. You just say what's the policy for childcare? What's the policy for time off if you need time off? Sick child, just hypothetical, sick child, and are there opportunities for flexible work? If you come in later, stay later, that kind of thing. And what are the opportunities maybe down the road if you want to go part-time? I know quite a few people who apply for full-time jobs and then early on in the negotiation they say they really only want to work 75% time because they have young children. And more often than not, and I'd say probably 90% of the time, it's like, okay, thanks, that's a deal breaker, we'll go on to the next candidate because we really need this person here full-time. So if you need a part-time job, then those are the things you should apply for. It's hard to convince someone who's searching for a full-time job to give you a part-time job unless you walk on water, in which case you probably wouldn't need the part-time job.
Thank you. That's some great advice. Following these lines kind of discrimination, how do you think that you can handle negotiations if you see certain discriminatory actions in the office? Say, for example, you mentioned that you're interested in information about childcare, and you see that the person interviewing you was really excited about you, and the second you mention that, they completely shut down. How do you handle that in the moment?
I think it's telling you a lot about the culture that you will be joining. And again, you need to understand what kind of support will make you happy, because when you're happy, you're going to be productive. And they're going to be amazed at how productive you can be. If they are throwing barriers at you or having people engaging in off-color jokes and things like that that are really disturbing to people, or making cracks about, oh, here comes mom, that's probably not going to be a positive, respectful work environment. Person who would do things like that is probably every review that goes up, no matter what your work performance is going to say, well, if they weren't so focused on their children, so for me, it's as much about the culture of the organization that I'm joining and making sure that's a good fit as getting the salary and the other things that I'm asking for. And that would be a real red flag to me that this maybe isn't a good culture to go to. And if they start bullying you, they're not going to, a bully's a bully. They're not going to stop bullying you if you take the position. That's going to be your life. Anything that's negative, my experience, it gets worse after you join the organization, because people are usually on their best behavior. And if that's someone's best behavior, their worst behavior is going to be pretty bad and make it challenging to stay in that environment.
Yeah, we actually put a poll out earlier this week to all of our viewers on Twitter, and about what different things that people look for when they're applying for jobs. And the second highest rated piece that people indicated was culture and environment of a workplace. So it's very important.
Yes.
This isn't necessarily about negotiation specifically, but how do you think in an interview or during a negotiation process that you can kind of take into account culture and see what type of environment a place of work is just through that very small lens and the little peek that you have when people are showing you their best?
I think you can see if the small things are present. So for me, the small things are if the boss is taking you around to show you the office or the unit, or the department chair is taking you through the department, is he on a first name basis with the staff? Is he saying, this is Kate, and here's what Kate does, or is he treating them just like their background? So there's little things that'll tell you that culture is very positive. Now, one of the things you want to do is make sure that you go out to lunch with students. If you can, do a lunch with staff, absent, faculty, or, go out with faculty, maybe talk to people from a different department, and you can get a really good sense of what kind of issues might be occurring in the unit that would be bad. But I think you just need to not be so focused on selling yourself that you forget to see the environment and take a look at the environment. But there's little tells that it's a bad environment, like people ignoring staff or treating them like, go get us coffee. Like, who was that? So I think you can easily tell, and you can easily tell by how happy the other workers are or other faculty are. One of the first jobs that I interviewed for, and I would have taken this job at the university if they'd offered it to me. But when I started meeting with faculty, the faculty immediately would start complaining about their colleagues and how horrible this person was, how horrible that person was, and everything was negative. And it was just like, I don't think this is a good fit. But when I interviewed at Davis, and this was maybe fourth or fifth institution that I'd gone to for an interview, what struck me was how everybody started talking about their colleagues. Nobody bragged about themselves, but they would say, who's doing great work in that area? It's so-and-so. Let's see if I can get you in to meet them, because, I'm sure they're going to win an award, or, the paper's going to be really well known. So I thought, wow, what a refreshing difference that people actually like each other and they actually promote each other. So it was a no-brainer to say, this is the environment for me.
That's phenomenal. And obviously that translated once you joined UC Davis as well.
Yes. So people didn't suddenly become like, well, I was just joking when I said I respected them. Nobody said that.
That's amazing. So when you're starting out early in your career, this is a wonderful way to learn about some skills that are really important in terms of negotiation. But how do you find people to mentor you and to teach you how to grow your negotiation skills throughout your career?
That is so important, and it's important. We ignore the little things that we should do, like doing a practice interview. Mm-hmm. Like with a mentor, or with an experienced person, or even with a peer, where they can ask you questions that might relate to employment, might relate to what are your goals in life, those kinds of things. There's great lists of questions you can get online for potential interviews, and just practice how you would answer and how you would react in some of these situations. Because the more professional you are, the higher you're going to rate with the company if there's multiple people applying for the position. And so not acting like you've heard that question for the very first time.
Right.
When you have an answer, like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I don't know is not a good answer.
Right. Fair enough.
Working for someone else is not a good answer. But you can practice that and say, well, I see myself moving up after I've accomplished X, Y, and Z.
That's wonderful. It must be very intimidating for early career professionals, people who are just starting out, or a PhD who's interviewing for a postdoc position, and this might be their very first time interviewing in academia. Do you have any advice for people who it's their first or second interview, for how to not be intimidated and how to maybe, if needed, shift the tables of power in a negotiation?
I think knowledge is power. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that you need to do is to be sure you know as much as you can about the culture, about what is negotiable, what is not negotiable, what is realistic to expect, what's unrealistic. And you really do need to develop connections with people there during your visit when you apply for the position and you're invited to come and visit. So that you will have people you can just call and say, hey, what about this? Should I do this? Should I do that? For one of the things where I see a lot of mistakes is the startup package for the lab. And you really need to focus on what do you need to be successful. You need to have everything down there, what you need to be successful. It's not your time to ask for stuff you're not going to use. Mm-hmm. And it's not your time to ask for stuff that people know is a mistake for you to get. So what do I mean by that? I had one student who had on his list a very high-end coffee maker that he wanted. And they were balking at it. And he said, but I want this coffee maker. And I said, no, you don't. You can't have it in your lab because you can't have food or beverage in your lab. Right. And I said, you don't want it in your office unless you want to become the barista for the department with all these people coming by. And it's not something you need to do your research. So he was arguing that he really needed a good cup of coffee. And I said, you'll be able to find places to get coffee. Do not make that the most important thing on your list. And he also had in his list things like spectrophotometer, and then it was like approximately $10,000. And I said, what kind of spectrophotometer? And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, no, that's the thing you need. So that's the thing you need to have thought about, researched, figured out what you want, and have an approximate cost, because that you really need. Coffee, you can probably figure out a way to get your coffee.
There's probably coffee somewhere on
campus. So I think that people make mistakes by saying, this is my opportunity to get anything I've ever dreamed of, rather than, what do I really need? And so the rule of thumb that I tell people is, if you have any experience writing a grant or reading someone's grant, would you put that item on a grant? A new car? No. Would you put it on a grant? No, you wouldn't. So that's your startup package, is to make sure that it is professional. And again, you don't have to wait until they call you and say, we'd like to offer you a position. Can you get us a startup package to start thinking about it and working on it? You should work on it as soon as you are starting to look for jobs. And you can have the people that you're working with, the institution where you are, help you. What was on their startup list, mm-hmm. What's a realistic thing. And then you'll go into the negotiation confident because you know this is what you need to be successful. And a lot of people have challenges asking for things for themselves. But one of the great things about an academic position is you're asking for things for your future lab team. So if it's hard saying I want, you can say my team will need. And here's why we will need this. And I think, again, that shows a lot more thought, and it bumps you up in people's estimation as to your level of professionalism and your understanding that this is really what you need. So they won't question everything that's on your list. It'll be, how do we go about meeting the needs? And there might be different ways to meet needs. So, for example, do you need access to a DNA sequencer, or do you need one in your own lab? You know, and if you need access to one, is have to be on campus? Is there a facility close by where you can send samples to? So again, you might not know the details of how an organization operates, but if you've got, these are the things I need, then maybe there's multiple ways to meet that need. And I think you go into it with that attitude. This is what I need. You can just pay me to get it, or, you know, you can provide it. You know, what are the options?
Yeah, I love that, asking for what you need, not necessarily things you want, but things you need in order to be successful.
Right.
It's wonderful. A question that we received that I actually think that I'm going to read it directly because I think that the phrasing is really important. How should women negotiate to not seem like they are asking for too much? So specifically for women who are thinking, okay, here's a list of things I need. Maybe a man would have no problem asking for it because it's like, oh, he's strong. But a woman might come off as aggressive. So what sort of advice do you have there for women?
Oh, that's the worst kind of mindset to have, that, oh, I'm a woman, so I can't ask for too much, because that's exactly what people are going to think. Oh, I'm a woman, you can't ask for too much. I think, again, if you keep it at here's the job and here's what I need, and especially for women, it's easier. Women are actually, if you look at the statistics, far better negotiators for other people than men are.
Very interesting.
And it's because you can tie into that, I'm nurturing these other folks, and then you just go for it without, you know, the same concerns that it's for
Wonderful.
me.
It's using that as
so,
a strength.
So use that as a strength, that you're doing this for the students, you're doing this for future students, you're doing this for whatever your research is, or if it's a company, you're doing it for the company. You know, this is what I need to make the company more successful. This is what I need to make whatever unit that you're joining better. You know, so don't make it about this is what I need for me because I don't know why I need it, because I probably shouldn't say I need it. Get away from that. Just say this is what I need to be successful, for the company to be successful, for my co-workers to be successful. Find something that you can argue for, so that you get away from that mindset of I am looking greedy, because don't go there.
Thank you. And I, you know, while we're waiting for some more people, we have some people who are very much excited that you talked about finding out about the company culture, and how important that is. While we're, you know, let's take a break, I guess, for some of the questions, and let's talk about some of your personal experience. So do you have a story, either positive or negative, during a negotiation where you were either the one negotiating on behalf of yourself or someone was negotiating with you when you were hiring them, that really sticks out in your mind?
This was a, I was chair of the search committee, and so the person was negotiating with me, and it was good he was negotiating with me and not someone else, because he told me that one of the things that he wanted from the university was the $25,000 gift that he didn't have to report to the IRS, and that he could spend on anything he wanted to spend it on because he wanted to get a car.
Oh.
And so I was like, okay, we're a public institution. There's no such thing. That's way over that. That's violating so many laws and policies. Where do I even begin? So I told him to take that off, because I'm not sending that forward to the department chair, because it looks like you're asking us to commit fraud. You know, and so they went through and found out where he got that idea from, which was someone on campus that he met while he was interviewing, who basically told him that the university did that all the time and he should have that down there and insist on getting it and have it in his letter. And so I said, you don't do anything. Let me call the vice provost of academic affairs and see if this is okay, because I'll call the vice provost directly. So I called the vice provost, had to hold the phone away from my ear of what we can do. And so then confirmed for him, but I thought it was pretty striking that, and it's a good point, because you will meet people who will give you really bad advice.
How do you sift out the good advice from the bad advice?
Well, I mean, you need to have other people you can go to. And I think that if you have a nurturing department chair or unit leader, I mean, they can point out that, wow, that's kind of wacky. Where'd you get that idea from? Rather than pushing for it. He came to me because he was a little bit suspicious. I mean, he was an international hire, so very different laws where he was coming from to here, but still a little suspicious that there would be free money that you could spend on anything, like a signing bonus.
I don't mean to laugh. It sounds a little crazy, though.
Well, to us it would be, because you go like, okay, wait, yeah, the IRS does not let you do stuff like that. You can't be accepting these gifts under the table. And that's kind of the way he described it, a gift under the table. And I'm like, no, that does not happen in a public institution. That really doesn't happen that much at private institutions, as far as I know, because you can get in trouble. So I think you do get bad advice from people.
Right.
I usually was taking positions where the salary was cut and dried. So you apply for a postdoc position through NIH, here's the salary, based on years of experience. And even taking a position as a faculty member, here's this, based on years of time it's going to take you to advance and get tenure. So there are always positions that where salary wasn't an issue. Negotiating for space, negotiating for startup, those were things that were challenging, because many times they'll tell you, yeah, we're going to do this, this, and this, and then it takes forever for it to happen. So like my lab needed to be built because it was converting an empty space into lab space.
Oh, wow.
And that took a year to do. Fortunately, another department gave me space in their department, so I was able to get started and, didn't miss a beat. But I was shocked at how long it took to get a lab ready. But pleased that there were people who knew this was going to be a problem and stepped in and said, no, you'll be over here, for the first, they thought, few months, but it turned out to be over a year.
And that speaks again to the company culture, like you were talking about.
Yes. People are looking out for people, so it's like I knew I was in the right place. But I have seen some students make so many mistakes in postdocs on startups and negotiation, where they kind of forget that it is the negotiation. You've got an offer, but it's not an offer that's cast in stone. Right. It's, can we come to terms? And either party can pull out. So if you're really pushing, and usually it's, I want a job for my spouse or significant other, and they will only accept this, and it's usually something that perhaps maybe they're not qualified for. I've seen students really, or former students really push for that, and then have the negotiator say, well, we can't come to an agreement, bye. And then it wasn't that important that the spouse get that kind of a position, but then it's too late. So that's usually where I see people get in trouble, not asking for themselves, but really pushing for a spouse, something that's unrealistic for the spouse to get.
Now, is during the extension of an offer, is that the only time you can negotiate? Say you're at an institution for 3 or 4 years, and there's something else that you feel like you need that you weren't able to identify at the beginning when you first accepted the position. Is there an opportunity to renegotiate once you're already employed?
There's always opportunities to renegotiate, but every time you open the negotiation door, you are opening them saying, see you later, bye. So for example, one of the things that's common in academia as well as in industry is that you go and get the job offer someplace else. And then you come back and say, unless you give me or match this or go higher than this, I'm leaving. And that gives them the opportunity to say, we'll help you pack, or to then come back and say, we'll match it. So the worst position to be in is to play that game if you're not prepared to leave. Because if you say, never mind, I'll stay here, you're done negotiating in the future because they know you're bluffing, so they can call your bluff. So you have to, if you're going to do something like that, you have to be prepared to actually leave. So make sure it's a position that you really want someplace else. And the issue that we see with women versus men is that if women start getting another offer, another place starts offering them things, they're far more likely to take that position and not negotiate at all
Right.
the institution where they are. Because someone is really valuing them and giving them what they need. A lot of timing is important too. A lot of people wait until they have what I call a win. So I landed the big grant. I got the Nobel Prize. I got some other prize.
The Nobel Prize should be worth
I got
negotiating
Paper of the Year. With some society to go in and say, you know what, I'm thinking of looking for positions elsewhere, and for institutions that are on top of it, the department chair will be putting you forward, to get something, so
Sure.
you don't have to really be negotiating. So there are other people who should be looking out for you and making sure if they want to keep you around. And then there are bad places where you're probably better off getting a job and moving someplace else if it's not really a nurturing environment. So people know the investment they've made in you to be a successful employee or successful in your profession as a faculty member. And they don't want to lose that investment by you walking out unless, you're asking for something that would be impossible. And but once, because I do know one faculty member here, once he had to back down and say, no, I don't really want to leave, he was done being able to play that game of getting a job offer. Yeah, he lost all of his leverage. So keep that in mind if you're negotiating something like that you need to be prepared to leave. And
Right.
the good thing is that women usually are, men aren't, but women usually are.
How about that? Now let me ask you another question about appropriate and timeline for negotiation. So when we're talking about company culture and feeling valued, should you even have to negotiate? Or do you think, do institutions offer you the top of what they're able to provide? Or do they lowball in some areas with knowing that you're going to intend to negotiate?
The cultures vary. In many places, they don't want to be on the Fortune 500 list of most inequitable company. So
Right.
they are attuned to the fact that negotiation isn't just a skill, it is steeped in implicit bias. That we're more comfortable with people who are negotiating, who are supposed to be the negotiators, and who are supposed to be, we're so hierarchical as a society, they're in that high tier, so they're supposed to ask for more because, they're higher tier.
Right.
And you're lower tier, so you're supposed to get less than them. So people know the artificial nature, and that's a societal construct. It's not something real that's associated with talent or ability or productivity.
How important to remember.
But it's still unconsciously applied, where someone might say, I'm okay with this person asking for a raise, and I'm not with that person, I don't know why. If they're saying they don't know why, then it's probably because the person I'm uncomfortable with is female, and the person I'm comfortable with is male. And women have actually told me at organizations or corporations that would surprise you, that they go in and ask for a raise and get told that, well, your husband has a job, so you don't really need
Oh, wow.
this money.
Wow.
And
Talk
I'm
about
like-
being bullied
and
in
I'm
a
like,
negotiation.
that you have to try and get in writing.
Yeah. Record
And-
that when you go
yes,
in.
record that when you go in. Say, would you put that in writing? Because I'm going straight to the president and explain that this is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Because it is, and I think that there are a lot of corporations that know that and know that it's right for people to complain and do that. So they're on top of it, and so a lot of companies are moving away from you have to periodically renegotiate your salary because
Right.
they know it disadvantages people not through any of their own lack of skill, but just because of the implicit bias of the person who's doing the negotiating on behalf of the company.
Wow. We have some questions coming in from our viewers online right now. And they want to know if you have any recommendations for reading material for students who are just starting out, tailored specifically for students and early career professionals as they're moving into their first career path interviews.
There's a lot out there that is sort of winning the corporate, game and all of those kinds of things. They don't directly apply to academia, but you can. There's a lot of redundancy in the advice that they're giving. But there's lots of things that are out there. If you go into the business field, lots of things like Harvard Business Review and things on how to negotiate that are good, and there's some good texts out there. So if you just search that, you should be able to find those. As I say, they're pretty redundant in terms of the advice that they're giving people. But one of the best things to do is to just do a practice, talk to people, talk to mentors, develop mentors, do that so that because it has to be a one-on-one thing. You really need someone who's going to say, okay, this is your style, and this is how you're going to win the day.
Right.
When I was a postdoc at Harvard, another postdoc came up to me. She had been given an offer at a company and was going for the interview to negotiate her salary. So she came down to ask me a couple more questions on what she should do. And I took one look at her and I said, go home and change. And she was like, why? She was wearing this short little frilly red skirt and stockings that were black and white striped, and then these big black shoes with a bow on them that were patent leather. And this is cruel, but I said, you look like a munchkin. And I said, go dress like a professional and you'll get a higher salary and you'll feel more comfortable. So she was kind of upset, but she went home and changed and then came back and said, you were right.
It's all about appearance.
You were right, it was about appearances. And she said, I said, you don't dress like that, like, ever. And she said she wanted to be cute. And I said, cute is not what you want to be when you're negotiating for a salary. Professional is what you want to be. And if that is something you would wear to give a lecture at, society or at an institution, then fine. But if you're not comfortable wearing that because that's something you would wear to a party, don't wear it. Look professional.
And how do you find these mentors to help you, especially if you're in the start of your career?
Hopefully you've already got them. So your major professor, other faculty members, people who've been on your hiring committee, or if you were postdoc, or people who have been on the admissions committee, if you're a graduate student, or someone you've had for a course if you're a graduate student. Hopefully you will have developed those kinds of interactions. But one of the things that we're thinking of doing, we probably will, is developing a website where we can have members and mentors, and where you can pose something, because for some issues, and there are many of them, not necessarily just negotiation, people are uncomfortable raising the issue with someone who's going to be writing letters of recommendation for you, so they don't think you're weak or you haven't figured something out.
Right.
So it's what we're trying to set up as a place where you can go and just be you and say, how can I do this? I've had lots of students come to me. Well, I keep calling them students, but they're past the students because they are postdocs and they're looking for positions, and ask for advice, and I always tailor it to their personality. And it's like, play to your strengths. Everybody's got strengths. Play to your strengths and be natural, be who you are. Don't try to be somebody else. Right. And just pay attention to the environment, because that'll give you a lot of good clues. So one recently applied for a position. I was on the search committee, but as a person not in the department, the external member from a different department. And this person had been invited to give an interview and then uninvited to give an interview.
Ooh.
And so he called me and he said, why was I uninvited? And I said, they didn't say anything to the search committee. What kind of interactions have you had? And this particular position was a position that taught undergrads, graduate students, and research. So it was a research teaching position. And you gave a research seminar, plus a second seminar was an undergraduate lecture, and it could be a topic of your choice. Well, he refused to do the undergraduate lecture, and kind of said undergraduate teaching is for losers. Oh. So they said, okay, we don't really need to waste our time interviewing you because that's part of the job.
Right.
We're not going to take it away from the job.
Of the bullet points.
And so when he told me that, I'm like, okay, if that's part of the job and you don't want to do it, then you shouldn't have applied for it. Right. And then he said, but I really do like teaching. Then why did you refuse to do it? And then he wanted to get back in with, I changed my mind, I really do like teaching. And I'm like, no, they're not going to take you back.
Right.
So
Right.
why did you say that to the chair of the committee that you didn't want to do the job?
There's that. We have some viewers who are interested in your personal story of your first academic negotiation, things that you learned, things you wish you had done differently or wish you knew at the time.
Well, this was the joke that I had when I first came here. I asked when my laboratory would be ready, and I came in October, and they had said it'll be done in January.
Okay.
And it was done in January of the following year. So my joke used to be, I forgot to specify the year. So I would always say, specify the year. And again, if I hadn't had people looking out for me, I probably would have gone someplace else. But that used to be the joke. Be sure you specify the year.
It's so funny.
If they tell you it'd be January, what year? But salary was fine. I rapidly got tenure because they gave me year credit for the postdoc position that I had, and I had an advanced position at the Harvard Medical School after my postdoctoral field, so they counted that. And so then it was, you've got 3 years for tenure instead of 6. And I was like, wow. Then I need a lab, and then when I did have the lab, it was like, I got great students. It was like phenomenal. Because when you're in a really good, positive environment, you just shine. And so I got the tenure in 3 years. And so I can't stress enough the value of the environment and knowing it's a fit and knowing these people are going to be your family when you join it. That's so important because you will move mountains, if they do that. Even if they say you've got 3 years to do this and you're like, wow, that's a little fast, but sure, I'll do it. Because I got the support of everybody. So pay attention to the environment and know that it's a place where you can grow and prosper, and the rest of it will fall into place.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you. As a reminder to our viewers that Dr. Bassan is happy to answer any additional questions offline after our live stream comes to an end. Feel free to either send us a direct message on social media, or you can email our blog at ourvoices.stem@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to pass along all of the questions, and Dr. Bassan can give you an answer. Before we wrap up, again, we just want to thank you again so much for joining us and being here and sharing all of your personal experience and advice with our viewers and community. Are there any sort of last pieces of advice that you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I guess the most important thing is always keep it about what you need to be successful. Don't think about it as power trip or how can I have power over them or it's a game, because very few people can go into that and be successful. Most people can't even self-promote, let alone inaccurately self-promote so that you look better than you are to get a much higher salary. People just can't do that. They have to be honest and they have to be themselves. And in the long run, that's going to serve you better than trying to figure out how can I go and pretend I did something that I didn't do or take credit for the work of other people in the lab. And yes, you'll see examples of people who do that and they seem to rise through the ranks faster. But you've got to be true to yourself. And I think if you are, you'll be surprised at how far you go.
That's wonderful. Thank you again. Thank you so much for joining us.